So today we are actually privileged to have the author of 50 Flippen Brilliant South African. I don't know why they use or he used the word Flippen, but we will hear more. So this project actually, ladies and gentlemen, contributes to the University of Johannesburg vision. The University of Johannesburg vision is to be an international university of choice anchored in Africa, dynamically shaping the future. And our mission is inspiring the community to transform and serve humanity through innovation and collaborative pursuit of knowledge. So I see UJ Reads as a way of us pursuing knowledge and cultivating the culture of collaboration and reading across the UJ community. Without any waste of time, let me just review to you what we have had. We had the likes of Zuma, which is the popular playwright and the poet, the likes of Eusebius Makeza, who came last year, who's the popular TV personality and the guy that I consider the most political guy, an opinionated guy. And we had Macintosh Pulela, who's the former journalist, and he was a SAPS spokesperson, and you know what happened with him. They fired him after he made a joke about the Vaseline. But it was wonderful. Last year we had more than 1,200 attendance to Macintosh Pulela's book. So today we have, very privileged, we have the author of this book, 50 Flippen Brilliant South African. His name is Alexander Parker. I spell it like that. Can I please just give you a brief background on his biography? Alexander Parker is a journalist and author whose work has appeared in Sunday Times, Business Day, Staff Magazine, The Witness, The Financial Mail, FHM, and Top Car, amongst the others. He was the launch deputy editor of the Top Gear magazine, a producer and the presenter of SABC Car Quest, and is currently motoring editor at Business Day. He's the author of the forerunner of this book, 50 People Who Stuffed Up South Africa. I wonder who are those. I'm sure our dear president makes the list. Don't quote me on that. As well as 25 cars to drive before you die. I would love to have that one. But I'm sure if you were to write the book like that now, it will be about 30 or your choice, you will revisit it based on the technological inventions that has taken place. So you know that the illustration in the books are from Shapiro, who is the cartoonist. I will just give you a brief background on Shapiro. Was born in Cape Town. In 1958, studied architecture at University of Cape Town. He received a Fulbright scholarship to study media arts at the School of Visual Arts in New York in 1988. There he studied under comics masters art and then he returned to South Africa in 1991, and he has published 17 cartoon collections, and the most recent one of which is But Will I Stand Up in Court. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to the author of 50 Flippen Brilliant South Africa, Alexander Parker.
Thank you.
I know, can I just see by the indication of hand, how many of you have read the book? Or, guys, you're welcome to join us. You can just sit down, join us, or while you stand in the queue. Hopefully you will participate. How many of you have read the book? All right. How many of you are planning to read the book? It's a very wonderful book. Yesterday I read about Oscar Pistorius' story because he is the most popular guy now. And the way Parker describes the guy, the way he says, and I said, wow, this guy conquered disability. This guy is the most phenomenal. But no one knew that after a year he would find himself in this tragedy. Such is life. But let's give Alexander Parker a chance to tell us how has it been to write the books and a bit of his background. Then I will open to the first set of the questions.
Thank you. Well, when it comes to Oscar Pistorius, obviously it's quite embarrassing because I don't think I'd put him in the book now, given what's happened. But that's the nature of the beast. When you write something, it goes down in stone. It's a product of the time that it's written, and that's the end of it. So yeah, maybe it's now more likely to be called 49 flipping brilliant South Africans and one guy who kills his girlfriend. Yes, Churchill, Winston Churchill was one of them. He was a journalist for the London Times at the time. Is that better? Oh, yes. So Churchill was one of them. Can anyone think of another great leader of his country who was there on the battlefield? Smuts was not there, no? No. Okay, well, one is quite obvious. It was Louis Botha. He was there. He was a general. And the third one is the one that no one ever gets. Mohandas Gandhi was on the battlefield at Spionkop, January 1900. He was a stretcher bearer. He was carrying injured soldiers on behalf of the British. And I think that the reason I've sort of brought that up is that I'm afraid to say when I was at university in Britain and at school, I found history extremely boring. And it was a man called David Rattray, who was a great Zulu war historian, who told me that history isn't about dates and nations, it's really about people. And that once you start talking about people, it starts to become interesting. So I've always considered these books to be kind of popular histories that have been perhaps zhuzhed up with a little bit of silliness about Kevin Peterson and people like that. I've always been really, really pleased by how well read they've been. 50 people who stuffed up South Africa sold more than 50,000 copies, which was really great. I think the books are a product of a person, and I think it would probably help you to know how I came to be here in South Africa. I come from a British family. We came to South Africa in 1993 as part of a large British delegation sent here to help in any way we could with the transition. And my father was a military expert, and he came and was helping the MK and the APLA guys talk to the SADF, as it was then. And he said it was the best 3 years he ever spent. So we came to Pretoria. But I lived in London, and I've lived in Paris, and I've even lived in Pietermaritzburg, which was exciting. And then I came to Joburg about 10 years ago. I've always been a journalist. It's the only thing I've ever done. And I love it. So to the books. I think it was 2007, I think. My father got a book for Christmas called 50 People Who Buggered Up Britain, written by Quentin Letts, who's that awful reactionary Daily Mail columnist. And I thought to myself that this country has a far, far better quality of villain than that country. So I had a publisher because I'd done a book called 25 Cars to Drive Before You Die. And I rang them up and said, we've got to do the South African version of this. And that's how 50 People Who Stuffed Up South Africa was born. Took about a year to write. And was essentially a year-long argument between myself and my publisher, my friends and my colleagues about who gets to be in this book, who are our 50 worst villains. Because obviously it would have been very easy to just go, well, let's have a look at all the people involved in the apartheid government and just put them in. And that would have been that, and that would have been legitimate, but it would also have been quite dull. So I decided that we would start now, and we looked at today, and we looked at the problems that we have today, and with some of our leaders today. And then I tried to sort of work out why things were like this. And then so you start looking a little bit into history, and you start reading up on our apartheid past and stuff, and you read up on people like Hendrik Verwoerd and D.F. Malan, and it's quite horrific. And then you think to yourself, well, how did this happen? Why did these awful people come to power? Why did this ever get so bad? And so you go back and you start looking at Afrikaner nationalism, and where did that come from? And so you start looking at the Anglo-Boer War, and then you start looking at the Great Trek and British imperialism, and all of a sudden, you're back in 1652, and Jan van Riebeck, who was never invited as far as I recall, is coming over the horizon on one of his ships. And so that's why Jan van Riebeck got into the book, because he wasn't invited. So anyway, that's how I ended up writing a popular history by accident. And then I put Kevin Peterson in because he's a moron. The book did so well, 50 flippin' brilliant South Africans kind of had to follow. Everyone was saying to me, basically, you have to do this book because you've portrayed our country in such a bad light. But what was interesting, I suppose, was just how difficult it was, because it's very easy to be rude about someone like Hendrik Flippen. You just have to read up, realize what a complete menace he was, and write it up. When it comes to being nice about people, it's much harder. This is something I've learned in journalism. And it's not easy to be, how can someone like me write about Nelson Mandela? What have I got to say that hasn't already been said? So you've got to find an angle. And you've also got to find people that perhaps you've never heard of, which is why there's a guy in this book called Nchingwayo Khoza, who maybe you have heard of, maybe you haven't, but he's like a scandalously overlooked South African hero, and I'm so glad I found him. He's the guy who commanded the Zulu Impi at the Battle of Isandlwana, which was Britain's greatest ever colonial defeat in its entire colonial history. This is a country that used to rule a quarter of the world. So here's this guy, he's put together this incredible military plan that worked on a scale that the Brits could not believe. And he sort of barely gets a mention. So I'm glad to have been able to bring people like Nchingwayo Khoza to hopefully a wider audience, because people like him need to be remembered for the kind of thing they did. So that's how it happened. It's exhausting writing a book. I have 3 small children and a job. It's not easy, and I'm obviously come from a very privileged background, and that's made some things easier for me. I have a natural understanding of a wider global context, because I've lived all over the place, but it's not easy, and that's why more of you guys should try and do it. It's not for sissies. Right, who wants to throw a brick at me?
All right, thank you very much, sir. So we will now maybe take the set of questions. I know that some of you in the audience have some burning questions to ask Alexandra here. You know, one of the things that I've learned when I read this book, I haven't read all the characters in the book, but it makes you to relate much more of the things, on the things that are happening now in our country. I was telling my wife yesterday that I didn't know that Mampela Rampela was married to Steve Biko. And I said, oh, all right, so she before she went to academia, she has been a political activist. So it really teaches you more about your country. So can we get questions directed to, the questions can be controversial. He told me that anyone can ask anything as long as is with regard to the characters in the book.
Just to start us off, how many of the people that you talk about in the book that are still living that you actually meet? Was that part of your strategy, or was it just based on literature or other information?
I have met a couple of them, but not in the purpose of writing this book. The second book, the Flippen Brilliant South Africans, I had a co-author, a guy called Tim Richmond, and he is also my editor and publisher. It's a small team. And he met, for example, Waddy Jones and did that interview. I didn't go and seek out people. I thought that would perhaps make it a little bit unfair, because obviously I can't go and meet DF Milan and ask him what the hell he thought he was playing at. When I can do that with, I don't know, in theory I can go and meet someone like a Jacob Zuma. So I didn't, and I didn't try to. There's a wealth of stuff out there, and it's just really a question of trying to get a fair balance on what is already out there. You know, these are not academic works. So clearly, they're supposed to be entertaining, and I haven't. No one said that I've got something wrong yet. but I'm looking forward to finding out if I did.
When you first wrote the book, how did you measure those people's brilliance? Was it through their influence to the society or their academic background?
Well, it's a bit of everything, really. I mean, essentially, I was looking for South Africans, or there are a couple of people in this book who are not actually South Africans, but kind of get appropriated. No, I just wanted great South Africans with an incredible story. And some, like the Staffer-uppers, some people kind of write their own entry. You can't write a book like this and not put Madiba in it, for example. Or someone like Walter Sisulu or Chief Albert Lutuli. You know, there are a bunch of entries that just wrote themselves, really, because you just kind of have to do it. The fun was really finding the other guys. You know, for example, choosing to put Winston Churchill in the book when he's very clearly not South African, but he made his name here during the early 1900s. So I kind of said, well, no, we'll have him. So because I was just really wanted to tell interesting and fun and positive South African stories, and this was just a kind of a nice platform to do it. I don't know if that helps.
Okay. You'll come next.
I'm not sure how to ask this question. I see you've got Cyril Ramaphosa here, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think we should replace Zuma with Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, that's a leading question. How can I say this? I think that his involvement in sort of fairly ruthless capitalism might be a problem for some voters in this country, but I do think that he's a man of integrity, and that I do feel that the president is the greatest harm that the president is doing is to the ANC, which is a magnificent organization with a great history, and I think it's a terrible pity what's going on. So yes, Ramaphosa over Zuma certainly is, in my opinion.
My question was almost as similar as hers, but I want to know, with all these people that you wrote about, I'm sure that not all of them are saints. So we're not all saints, but then how do you actually not tend to focus on the negative aspects of what they've done, but more positive? How do you balance that?
It's a great question, because some of the greatest abuse I got for the Flippen Brilliant books was, and it's always white people. What is it with white people? They gave me hell because I put Winnie Madikizela Mandela in here, and actually it was John Matham on 567 Cape Talk just really tore a strip off me about this. He was furious. And I tried to make the point that everyone's personal history is nuanced and complicated, and so are human beings nuanced and complicated. And I think in the case of Madikizela Mandela, and the last thing she needs is a white guy telling her how awesome she is, but I felt that she made some terrible mistakes in the late 80s. I think we can probably all agree on that. But what she had endured and the services that she provided, I think, for people's dignity at the worst of times, I think it's just an extremely powerful story, and I'm quite aware that a lot of the people in the book are far from saints. You're absolutely right that some of them are probably deeply unpleasant, but that doesn't mean they haven't done great things, and so in they go, and controversy.
My name is Lucy. I would like to know, I read your introduction. I like the introduction, and I like the Christian Bennett. Why him as the first person to talk about
Well, Christian Barnard. Well, okay, look, the book's alphabetical, so that's why he's the first up. But obviously because he's got a kind of rags to riches amazing story, and he was brave and potentially a little bit foolhardy and went ahead and did this incredible thing, the first human heart transplant. And that was a great South African medical thing, and obviously it happened when it happened, but that doesn't mean he's got a fascinating story. I mean, you know, he was a philanderer of note, and apparently extremely good looking, and so I thought, cool, let's put him in.
Hi, I just want to ask you, on the book you wrote about Lucas Hadley, saying that he was, staying in a 2-bedroom house and he slept in the kitchen. So I want to revert back to the question of that: did you follow him, or how did you get the information that he slept in the kitchen?
I don't know. I must have read it somewhere. That doesn't mean it's true. No, I must have read it somewhere. I think the point I was trying to make was that he didn't grow up in a privileged fashion. He grew up as a fairly ordinary South African guy, and went on to become an absolute superhero. And also, he played for Leeds, which makes him great.
Well, you mentioned that you were looking for South Africans with the most fascinating story. So I was just wondering, how did you depict which one is more fascinating than the other? Was it mainly based on your idea of fascinating, or did you maybe try and get a generalized idea of what people regard as fascinating?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both, because obviously you want people to buy the book, right? So you've got to take into account what popular feeling might be. But then also it's got to be, it's my book, I've got to write it myself, I've got to feel it, and it's got to feel true. So like I said before, it was really, I would have an idea, and then I'd talk about it with my partner or my publisher or my colleagues at Business Day, and basically I just have a lot of arguments with people, and then something would come out of it. Both of these books were the result of long conversations.
You mentioned earlier on that you used not just South Africans, and when I read the book, I was just wondering, did you run out of good South Africa, brilliant South Africans? Why include Churchill and all the others, when I'm sure there must be others that are equally brilliant,
Yeah,
that are South African?
You're right. I mean, I could have written 100 brilliant South Africans. It's all about, it's that endless discussion that my publisher and I had about balance, and trying to keep it interesting, and having a couple of sort of global figures felt right for the balance of the book. Obviously, I could have found more great South Africans. I mean, my first list was 150 people long, and they were, I would say, bar 2 or 3 of them all South African. So it wasn't a question of running out of great South Africans. It was a question of some of these entries serve the purpose of representing a certain kind of person. So, for example, in the Stuff Rapper book, I put in Coleman Andrews, who used to run South African Airways, not because Coleman Andrews per se was such a disaster, but because I wanted to talk about the problems we have in our state-owned entities and that kind of stuff. So some of these people served that role. What would be another good example? I think I wrote this down somewhere. Wouter Basson. He's in the Stuff Rappers, and I put him in as just sort of, you had to have one guy who was this, not the political figure, but the sort of the arch murderous apartheid state jackboot kind of guy. And so in he goes. There are plenty of people who could have taken Wouter Basson's slot in that book, and of course there are probably 50 of them, but it's about balance.
Who would be your top 3 that you would remove from the book as a journalist?
From the Flippen Brilliant?
Yeah.
Oscar Pistorius can take a jump and go to jail, actually. Since then, don't know, that's a hard question. I'm having to look at my list. Jem Kutsia, there you go. Terrible dinner company, apparently. I might put, how about this? Maybe I should put Julius Malema in. Because at least he starts interesting conversations, right? I mean, that's not a bad thing.
Okay, you got the book. 50 people who stuffed up South Africa, right? Do you feel South Africa is stuffed up?
No, actually, that's a very good question because it was one of those things. It's in my introduction to the book, very clearly saying this country is not stuffed up, but these people. The problem is that the title, 50 people who tried their damnedest to stuff up South Africa but ultimately failed, is a really clunky title. So it was practical reasons only.
The Madonna of the Township, why did you include her there in the book?
Are you talking about Brenda Fassie?
Yes.
Yes, because she's awesome. And if I drive to work in the mornings, to school with my eldest daughter, who's going to be 6 later in the year, if I don't play Vulintlele, she gets really, really cross. And All Black President. So no, I mean that's obviously not the reason why. I just thought that it's a question of balance and having I wanted an artist of some sort, and she was such a character and such a superstar, and also obviously a fairly tragic tale. And I just thought another great South African story that ended sadly, but I've always had a soft spot for Brenda Fassie.
Okay, just for interest's sake, I was wondering why you have chosen Shapiro as the cartoonist. He's brilliant, but he's also controversial. Did you use existing cartoons from him, or did he do the cartoons especially for the book?
Jonathan was actually a great partner in both of these books because he's obviously got a great history of being an activist. So he's drawn a lot of the people I was naturally talking about. So he didn't draw anything specifically for me, but he threw open his archive and said, you can have whoever you want. It was actually an extraordinary, I was quite honored because he didn't know what I was going to write. You know, I could have written something really awful. But he seemed to trust me. So he threw open his archive. He said I could use pretty much anything I wanted. And he was, because he's been interested in politics for a very long time, he was a great, not a mentor, but he was a good guy to have to I could call up and say, maybe I should do this, Jonathan, what do you think? And he'd say yes or no. It was good. He didn't just provide the pictures, he provided a lot of advice as well.